Ghosts with bloodshot eyes gathered around them, filthy ghosts covered with white dust. From all ends of the stronghold, they closed in around the two new guys. They silently listened to their report on what they'd seen along the way. The stronghold's commander, a tired, worn-out man twice Elan's age, asked what he was doing in the area. Elan looked him in the eye and said he'd been sent from the Babylon base to remove classified information and secret equipment from the magma outpost, and asked when he could go there. The soldiers gave one another sideways looks. The commander just grimaced and left, taking the tankist with him. A fat reservist with a blunt look turned to Elan and said in a drawl, "Forget about magma. Those guys are done for. And even if by some miracle anyone's alive there, the Egyptians are throttling them from all directions." Elan was astonished. Then why doesn't someone go help them? Why wouldn't the Air Force take out the Egyptians? The soldiers snickered. The Air Force? Forget it. Forget everything you know about the IDF. The others mumbled in concurrence. You should have heard the guys from Hisayon crying over the radio, said a blond soldier with a soot-blackened face. Depressed the hell out of us. Elan whispered, "Crying? They really cried?" The fat guy said, "They cried, and they cursed us for not coming to help. Don't worry, we'll be crying soon, too." This passage comes from To the End of the Land, a novel by the great Israeli author David Grossman. It is set in the events that happened beginning 50 years ago today, if you're using the Jewish calendar, the Yom Kippur War of 1973. On that day, armies from Syria and Egypt attacked Israel, seeking to reclaim territories that they had lost in the 1967 Six-Day War, and they hoped to go beyond those territories. As this passage makes clear, the Israeli Defense Forces victory of 1967 was not replicated in 1973. The first reports of Egyptian and Syrian advances stunned a nation that had been smug about its military prowess over the past 6 years. The Egyptians in particular made substantial gains for days before Israel was able to retake the initiative. The events are dramatized from the perspective of Israel's leaders by the new film Golda, starring Helen Mirren as Israel's Prime Minister, Golda Meir. The movie makes clear that not only the public, but the leadership was initially at a loss with how to deal with what everyone agreed was a shocking threat. I've been to Israel twice this year, in February for the convention of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and in July for the Rabbinic Torah Seminar sponsored by the Shalom Hartman Institute. Both times, the news was dominated by the massive weekly demonstrations against the judicial changes that the current Likud and far-right government is sponsoring. At Hartman, I listened to a presentation about these changes by Yossi Klein Halevi. Klein Halevi made Aliyah from the United States about a decade after the Yom Kippur War and has become a leading journalist, author, and generally moderate voice in Israeli political discourse. I said that I heard a presentation from Yossi, but that's not the right word for it. It was more of a half-hour thoughtful and articulate, anguished cry. He said that many Israelis have spent the past several months trying to get used to a situation that had previously been unthinkable. Israel's future as a liberal, democratic, and classical Zionist state is at risk. Remember that this man is not a firebrand of the left, so it's important to take him seriously when he says that the current government is a coalition of political extremists, religious fundamentalists, and the merely corrupt. A prime minister who is on trial, Benjamin Netanyahu, is trying to tamper with the judicial system. The judicial coup, for that is what it is not just an assault on the courts and their ability to keep the government from destroying the rule of law. As Yossi says, that government wants to replace independent civil servants with political appointees throughout the ministries. This is exactly how Viktor Orban destroyed democracy in Hungary. It's that serious. As Rabbi Josh Weinberg, the executive director of ARTSA, the Association of Reform Zionists of America, puts it, the Yom Kippur War was an existential threat to the guf, the body of the State of Israel. The judicial coup is an existential threat to the neshama, the soul of the state. The state cannot survive without either one. North American Jews tended to hear of the war as they were in synagogue for Yom Kippur. Some rabbis scrapped their sermons and spoke extemporaneously about what Israel meant. If you were Orthodox, you didn't turn on your radio or television, so you might not have been informed about what was happening. One Orthodox Jew recalls that a middle-aged man in suit and tie whom I didn't recognize appeared on the steps of my Upper West Side shtibel in New York as the congregation was returning for Mincha and Ne'ilah. In the accented English of a European survivor, he announced that a war had started in Eretz Yisrael. His voice trilled with fear and excitement, even horror. He was a refugee announcing the latest conflagration. Having delivered his fateful message, he vanished. I never saw him again. Many people initially expressed the same sort of certainty that Israel had before the attack. The IDF would deal with it swiftly and easily. By the time they were watching the news that night, they knew that their optimism was misplaced. Dark days lay ahead. But their fears drove them to act. The rabbi of a conservative congregation recalls that there was a groundswell of concern for Israel's future in a way I had never experienced before. The United Jewish Appeal raised 75% more money in its 1973-74 campaign than it had the year before, almost all of the increase coming in the month after Yom Kippur. Synagogues and JCCs ran letter-writing campaigns, phone-a-thons, and blood drives. The Jewish community exerted political pressure to ensure that Israel received the military supplies it needed. One person involved in efforts at a national level said that the war brought about far greater cooperation among major Jewish agencies than ever had been before. One Canadian Jew, then living on a Greek island, decided that he had to do something when the war began. Leonard Cohen flew to Israel. It wasn't clear what he intended to do, but he knew he had to be there. The composer of Suzanne, So Long Marianne, and Bird on the Wire did not pack his guitar. He had no intention of singing. But he met some musicians in a bar in Tel Aviv. They explained that Israel had a tradition of having entertainers go to the front lines to play to the troops. It wouldn't be big shows. They would entertain companies, many of whom were taking a few hours off from battle. At this time, foreign entertainers did not often visit Israel. His appearance might show the fighters that the world cared. The other musicians invited Cohen to join them. And so he found himself in the Sinai in the midst of a war that was the most terrifying in the history of the state up to that time. The Israeli journalist Matti Friedman has recently written a book about Cohen's time in the Sinai entitled Who by Fire. Friedman tells how Cohen wrote the song Lover, Lover, Lover while he was playing for the soldiers. It contains this verse. And may the spirit of the song, may it rise up pure and free, may it yield a shield for you, a shield against the enemy. Friedman asks, did Cohen think a song could protect these young people? He answers himself by referring to what will happen tomorrow in our service. One of the duties of a priest, a Kohen, in Judaism, is to stand in front of the congregation and call down divine protection. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, may God bless and guard you. Invoking the shield is what a Kohen does. This Cohen performed Lover, Lover, Lover for the first time for a group of pilots, many of whom had witnessed their comrades going down in flames or into the sea. Years later, one of them said, the experience, as I remember it, was forgetting everything and going to another world, one that wasn't all of us racing around and the dead people and the fear. I recall it as a formative event. One of the world's greatest singers coming in the middle of the war amid all the chaos, bringing us some quiet and the sound of something else. In an unpublished manuscript about his time in the Sinai, Cohen wrote, "There were suggestions here and there that I was useful." I'm not Leonard Cohen, not by a long shot, but I got some glimpse of what it's like to show up for an embattled Israel. I told part of the story in the winter to a few of you who came for Shabbat services, so forgive me if you're among them as I tell it again to more of you. As I mentioned, I had come to Israel for the convention of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. On Friday evening, we split up and headed to several different Reform congregations to celebrate Shabbat. With about a dozen colleagues, I went to Gedera, an unassuming community about 30 miles south of Tel Aviv. After services, we rabbis and about 20 people from the congregation gathered in a small house and managed all to fit in and have dinner. As much as I hate to remember this part on Yom Kippur, the homemade food that was thrust upon us was delicious. And while we were enjoying the repast and the company, each of us from America had a version of the same conversation. The people of this Reform community were used to having to fight. Gedera officials had consistently defied court decisions requiring them to allow the Reform congregation to build its own synagogue. But this was different. If the judicial coup went through, those court decisions would be in the hands of the very politicians who were denying them their rights. And much worse would happen. They knew it. And they knew we knew it. They all expressed their gratitude for our coming and helping them fight for democracy. The next night, I was at my first demonstration, this one in Tel Aviv. Israel being Israel, I saw one of my new Gedera friends there among the thousands of people at the demonstration. Rabbi Rick Jacobs, the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, became the first non-Israeli to speak at one of these demonstrations. It mattered. We mattered. Speaking out mattered. Being there mattered. When Leonard Cohen returned to his Greek island after the war, he started to compose a song. It was based on the Unatana Tokev prayer that he had learned as a child in Montreal and that we will hear sung tomorrow morning. It tells that on Rosh Hashanah it is written and on Yom Kippur it is sealed, who will live and who will die, who by fire and who by water, who by war and who by beast. It was sung in synagogues in Israel on Yom Kippur 1973, just hours before the siren sent thousands of people to their deaths by fire or water. Who knows if Cohen was thinking of them when he wrote, and who by fire, who by water, who in the sunshine, who in the nighttime, who by high ordeal, who by common trial, who in your merry, merry month of May, who by very slow decay, and who shall I say is calling? As Maddie Friedman writes, Cohen's song is now more famous than the original. But there's another version of Unatana Tokev connected to the war. Friedman recounts an interview with Amichai Yarchi, a soldier from Kibbutz Beit Hashita. Rumors had begun circulating in his unit. The first ones said that the kibbutz had lost 10 members, then 11. It didn't seem possible. But after the ceasefire, 11 small army trucks pulled through the kibbutz gates, headlights on even though it was daytime. Each bore one coffin. The men were the kibbutz's next generation, young workers and fathers, most of them reservists who'd been called from their regular lives a few weeks before. Many people in Israel, and especially on kibbutzim like this one, hadn't observed Yom Kippur before 1973, believing their generation had progressed beyond archaic religion. After the war, Yom Kippur on the kibbutz became a day of mourning. I have 2 Yom Kippurs, Yarchi said. One Yom Kippur is the day the war broke out, and the other Yom Kippur belongs to the rest of the people of Israel and is passed from generation to generation. The Yom Kippur of the war was the end of an era and the beginning of a new era, one that I think Beit Hashita and the state of Israel haven't recovered from yet. In 1990, one of Israel's most famous songwriters, Yair Rosenblum, came to stay at Kibbutz Beit Hashita. As the holy day and its implications started to fall on the kibbutz, he decided to present it with a gift. He wrote a new setting for the words of Unatana Tokef. Friedman continues. There was a member of the kibbutz who had a good singing voice, and he performed the new tune when the community gathered that Yom Kippur. Rosenblum had introduced an unapologetically religious text into an atheist stronghold and touched the rawest nerves of the community, the loss of 11 sons in the space of 3 weeks. The result appears to have been overpowering. People started to cry. The music made its way from that kibbutz to others and then to synagogues across Israel, where it's now probably the most popular melody for prayer marking the height of the Yom Kippur service. Part of the composition's power is the way it joins the two pieces of Yom Kippur in Israel, Jewish tradition and the War of 1973. Meanwhile, both in Israel and abroad, it's not uncommon to hear Unatana Tokef sung to the tune of Who by Fire. The war has left its impact on Jews throughout the world. Who by Fire, the Yair Rosenblum Unatana Tokef, the movie Golda, all are reflections on what happened 50 years ago. We don't know what the reflections will be on the attempted undermining of Israeli democracy, on the weekly demonstrations that began almost a year ago and have not abated, on the demonstrations that followed Prime Minister Netanyahu to the United States and the United Nations. Since we don't know how the story will end, we have to play our parts in determining that. We Jews of a democratic nation owe it to Israel to do what we can to keep it Jewish and democratic. We need to learn, we need to speak out. We can even demonstrate here. One of the best ways for us to learn about Israel and to connect more strongly to it is to visit. I know that some of you will be joining me in February as we see for ourselves what Israel is about, its complexity and its opportunity. I hope that more of you will consider coming on this journey. Toward the end of Leonard Cohen's life, he wrote a song addressed to God called You Want It Darker. The song is true to its name. It's dark, in the way that Leonard Cohen is, without somehow ever having us forget our humanity. The song is in English, except for one word. That word is sung by the cantor of the Montreal Synagogue where Cohen grew up. The word is Hineni, I'm ready. Hineni, I'm ready. As American Jews said when they stood up for Israel as it was threatened with disaster 50 years ago. Hineni, I'm ready, as Leonard Cohen showed when he came to the place that needed him. Hineni, I'm ready, as we can all say when we show up for the Israel that needs us so very much today. Hineni, Hineni, Hineni. Ken Yehi Ratzon, be this God's will.